Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Christen Smith, Pennsylvania editor for the Center Square. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Anthony Hennen. This week, Josh Shapiro proposed his first budget and what might possibly be the longest budget address in recent history. Anthony, you wrote up a very broad overview for us this week. Can you tell us more about what the governor's biggest priorities are?
Generally, we're looking at a slight increase in the budget request here. I believe it was almost about 4% of an increase compared to last year. But Governor Shapiro is basically targeting, I guess you could say, three things here. One is boosting business growth and attracting some of these major economic projects. Another is seeing a boost to education spending. He proposed, I believe, a little more than $1 billion over the next 5 years. And also just generally turning Pennsylvania into a place that people want to move into. He's looking to try to attract more teachers, more police officers, more EMS workers, trying to offer them some tax incentives to come back and fill some unfilled and open job openings have been, really hurting some of Pennsylvania's statewide public safety structure here.
What seemed interesting to me, too, is that right off the bat, there was a discrepancy in how much his plan would actually cost. The Shapiro administration says their number is $44.4 billion. Republicans in the House and Senate say this is actually closer to $45.8 billion. So there's already some skepticism and some questions about how we're paying for this and what the spend number we have to hit. Did you hear anything criticism-wise about where does the rainy day fund factor into all of this?
So when you're looking at it, of course, Democrats are arguing that this is an investment in Pennsylvania's future. Republicans are arguing that we can't afford this spending and a dollar spent this year is a dollar we can't spend next year. But when you're looking at it within Shapiro's budget request, you do see the budget surplus falling from about $5.5 billion this year onwards to dwindling basically to $188 million within the next few years. This is not necessarily a surprise. This is something that people can overlook, but Pennsylvania's spending is expected to not be able to keep up with its tax revenues that it receives due to more pressure from an aging population and some other reasons. But it does look like Shapiro's budget request, they're drawing down from the budget surplus to fill some of these needs rather than using steady tax revenue.
Well, and it's depending on how you look at it, that makes sense as what the rainy day fund is there for. In recent history, Pennsylvania had one of the smallest rainy day funds. I think just a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, it was in the $300,000 range. We've stacked it up to $5.6 billion since the pandemic. And a lot of that is federal stimulus money that we socked away for a rainy day. And so it makes sense that they're dipping into it, but the level at which it's being depleted definitely concerns the appropriations chairman in the Senate, as well as even House leadership has expressed grave concerns about how draining this fund will put us, right over a fiscal cliff that our treasurer has been warning about, that the IFO has hinted at. And you mentioned the word investment, I think, to something that we heard from House Democrats, who, again, are newly in charge of the House and will have a lot of influence this year on what the final budget looks like. They basically kind of shrugged off these concerns, saying that, Republicans aren't taking into account the economic benefits of raising the minimum wage, of, expanding childcare access, of creating jobs through business development. I think that there's some priorities in there, as Senate Majority Leader Kim Ward said, that they agree with. There's other things in there that I think are non-starters. Can you point to some of the issues or the proposals that he had that probably aren't going to get into the final budget?
At least the $15 minimum wage. I don't think we're going to see a lot of movement on that, given that, basically every state bordering Pennsylvania has a higher minimum wage. We could see Republicans agree to some compromise on that, maybe bump it up $7.25 now, maybe get up to $9 or $10 an hour. In the broad scheme of things, very few workers actually make the minimum wage. So bumping it up, you might have some wiggle room, especially now where you see a lot of these starting salaries are $12, $13, $14 anyway. So that could be some sort of bargaining chip to get something else that they want. There's also been talk about, just the level of education funding is constantly going to be something they're going to argue back and forth about. But in general, I guess it depends how hard the Senate really wants to push on some of this stuff. There's a bare minimum, just barely enough in the House for the Democrats to push through. But, the Republicans control the Senate. And so there's some compromises on this idea of supporting Pennsylvania's natural resources and energy industry, mental and behavioral health spending, things like that we talked about last week in the podcast. But, I think that's going to come down to a lot of these, how much spending are they going to tolerate? How much can they get away with the compromise? If nothing else, it seems like they're closer to an agreement than the starting point a few years ago with former Governor Tom Wolf. So I think over these next few weeks, and as we go through these appropriation hearings, we're really going to see where a lot of these push points are.
Both the House and the Senate will kick off almost a month of appropriations hearings, which is where they go through department by department and analyze what the governor is asking for. They can be long hauls. It's, for everybody listening, but you can really drill down to what these proposals are going to cost and what they mean for the residents of Pennsylvania. And so governors rarely get their budget proposal. It never looks the same by the time June 30th rolls around. So we will be keeping readers up to date on where Shapiro's proposals go next and how much buy-in he's going to get from the House and Senate. A little side note here is that Senate Majority Leader Joe Pittman kind of already hinted that he's willing to blow past that June 30th deadline in order to get an agreement that everybody feels comfortable with. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Anthony Hennen, this is Christen Smith. Please subscribe and thanks for listening.
Freedom and liberty are important to all of us. If you're looking for civil, intellectual conversations with those shaping the future of freedom, try the Future of Freedom podcast with me, Scott Bertram. We speak with leaders across the country in the greater conservative and libertarian movements. In-depth conversations about where the next intellectual battles will happen across the country. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcasts.